I lost my daughter because of a false testimony from my best friend, and 10 years later, I discovered he was the one abusing her all along. It was a humid summer morning in Riverfield, a small rural township nestled between cornfields and dusty roads in the American Midwest. At the township administrative office, a long wooden table stood at the center of a spacious meeting room filled with plastic chairs, faded maps, and motivational posters peeling off the walls. Mr. Richard Grant, the township chairman, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks a turning point. Our township is entering a new era. Starting next month, Riverfield will be renamed to Prosper Valley Township, a name that reflects abundance and progress." A light round of applause followed. Seated around the table were his core team: Mr. Michael Barnes, his loyal secretary; Mr. Benjamin Clark, head of the production committee; Mrs. Susan Hale, the cooperative manager; Mr. Thomas Reed, livestock farm supervisor; Ms. Emily Carter, a young and promising agricultural engineer; and Mr. Andrew Shaw, the cultural affairs chief. But the real surprise came when Mr. Grant rolled out a large chart. "In line with the renaming," he said proudly, "we are updating our titles to better represent our modern vision." Benjamin blinked. "Updating, sir?" "Yes," Mr. Grant confirmed. "You, for instance, will now be the director of the Center for Industrial Development." Benjamin stared at him, stunned. "And Susan Hale will now be CEO of the Prosper Valley Trading and Services Company. Thomas, you'll be director of the Livestock Development Center. Emily, you're leading the Department of Agricultural Research and Application. And Andrew Shaw, you're now the director of the Center for Culture and Media." For a long moment, no one spoke. The new titles sounded grand, powerful even. A strange wave of pride passed over the room. Benjamin hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Grant, with all due respect, are these titles just names, or will our actual work change too?" Mr. Grant raised an eyebrow and smiled knowingly. "Of course the work remains the same. But perception, Benjamin, perception is everything. We must present ourselves to the outside world as forward-thinking. Our names must inspire confidence. Investors, officials, even tourists, they judge a place by its branding." Emily glanced at the others, then at her newly minted title, Director of Agricultural Research and Application. It sounded like something from a high-tech lab. Meanwhile, her actual day-to-day included inspecting potato fields and making sure the irrigation lines didn't burst. Thomas leaned forward, rubbing his temple. "But sir, don't you think this is a bit excessive? I mean, I'm just managing 200 pigs in a cattle barn. Director of a livestock development center sounds like I'm running a multinational meat enterprise." Mr. Grant chuckled. "Thomas, it's all about modernization. The pigs don't know your title, but the provincial council might, and they'll be more inclined to fund a development center than a barn." The room fell silent again, this time with a mix of amusement and confusion. Susan leaned over and whispered to Emily, "Do we also need new business cards? Or maybe even a new signboard for our co-op?" Andrew, usually the quietest, finally spoke up. "Mr. Grant, this is all good and fine for outside appearances. But what happens when people visit and realize the Center for Culture and Media is just me, an old printer, and a shelf of outdated VHS tapes?" Mr. Grant stood firm, raising a hand like a conductor calming an orchestra. "Listen," he said, voice firm. "The name is the first step. The next is ambition. Today, it's a new title. Tomorrow, it's a new budget, new connections, and yes, perhaps a real center with real facilities. We must build the image first, and reality will follow." The room remained unconvinced, but nobody argued further. They all nodded slowly, half out of respect, half out of resignation. Later that afternoon, Emily sat beneath a tree on the outskirts of the township, sipping tea and staring at the rice paddies swaying in the wind. She pulled out a notebook and wrote at the top, "Director of Agricultural Research and Application, Emily Carter." Then, below it, she scribbled, "Still chasing ducks out of the field. Still checking the same soil. Still working with the same shovel." And yet, she smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, the name was the start of something bigger. As dusk settled over Greenfield Township, the newly minted directors and managers made their way home, each carrying a strange blend of amusement, pride, and uncertainty. The dusty roads hadn't changed. Neither had the creaky bikes, the flickering street lamps, or the low drone of crickets. But somehow, everything felt a little different now. At the local pub, now unofficially known as the Community Hospitality Exchange Hub, Thomas nursed a glass of corned beer. Across the room, Andrew was trying to explain his new role to an elderly farmer who just wanted help fixing the village speaker system. "So, you're not the loudspeaker guy anymore?" the old man asked, squinting. "I still am," Andrew muttered. "I just have a longer title now." Outside, Emily met up with Susan under the old banyan tree. They leaned against their bikes, sharing roasted peanuts and watching the stars come out. "You think this will actually change anything?" Susan asked, tossing a shell. Emily paused. "I don't know, but maybe change doesn't start with the work. Maybe it starts with the way we see the work." Susan chuckled. "So tomorrow, when I'm elbow deep in compost, I'll just whisper to myself, 'Director of Organic Waste Conversion and Sustainable Systems,' and pretend I'm saving the world." Emily grinned. "Exactly. It's all about mindset." They both laughed, but deep down, they understood Mr. Grant's gamble. In a world where perception shaped reality, perhaps bold names could give birth to bold futures. As they parted ways, the township lay quiet beneath the stars, its fields rich with crops, its air filled with dreams, and its people, newly titled, yet deeply unchanged. A few days passed, and the novelty of the new titles hadn't worn off. At the weekly township gathering, Mr. Grant stood under the faded banner that used to read Village Meeting. Now, hastily taped over, it read Strategic Operations Summit of Greenfield Township. Thomas, now proudly donning a button that read Director of Beverage and Fermentation Sciences, brought the beer. It tasted the same, maybe a little warmer than ideal, but people sipped it differently, as if drinking at a conference. Emily stood and cleared her throat. "As manager of environmental and aesthetic resources, I'd like to propose planting wildflowers near the irrigation ditch." There was a murmur of interest. Mr. Patel, the irrigation technician, now the lead water infrastructure optimization officer, nodded approvingly. "That might help with the erosion too," he added, feeling more invested than he had in years. Susan, always one for action, raised her hand. "And I've organized a compost innovation day next weekend. We'll be testing a new layout behind the chicken coops. Bring your waste, bring your hope." Laughter bubbled around the circle, but it was the kind that came from shared pride, not mockery. And then it happened, something none of them expected. A university professor, passing through on a field research trip, overheard their conversation. Fascinated by their terminology and structure, she asked to visit again with a team of students. "There's something quite progressive about your community model," she said. "It blends rural sustainability with a corporate framework in a fascinating way." The villagers stared at her blankly. But Mr. Grant, ever the quiet thinker, just smiled. "We're simply trying to respect the work," he said. News spread. A blog post from one of the students went viral. "The Rural Corporate Model. What Greenfield Township Can Teach the World." Suddenly, journalists were calling. NGOs were asking to visit. A small grant even came through to build a community center, now titled the Integrated Village Excellence Hub. But despite the growing attention, the township remained grounded. They still grew crops the old way, still fixed things with duct tape and wire. Only now, they did it with names that echoed through digital newsletters and urban conferences. And when the world asked how they had transformed so quickly, the people of Greenfield Township simply shrugged. "It all started with a joke," Emily said once in an interview. "But jokes have a way of showing us the truth. And the truth was this: dignity in labor isn't given by titles. But sometimes, a title can help people see the dignity that was always there." As the months rolled on, Greenfield Township found itself in the midst of a quiet revolution. What had started as a playful rebranding of roles grew into a renewed sense of pride and cooperation among its people. At the newly renamed Integrated Village Excellence Hub, weekly meetings transformed into cross-functional summits. Posters hung on the walls with inspirational slogans like "Synergize the Soil" and "Every Chicken Counts," from coop to contribution. The village newsletter, formerly known as Greenfield Monthly, now bore the ambitious title, The Operational Review, Q1 Community Metrics, and Innovation Digest. Children started playing office instead of house, referring to their treehouse as headquarters. They issued pretend badges made from cereal boxes and organized mock board meetings discussing snack distribution strategies. Yet, for all the pomp and parody, something real was happening beneath the surface. Elderly villagers who once felt forgotten now had official designations and were regularly consulted. Mr. Thompson, once just Old Tom with the sheep, was now the senior livestock systems advisor and spent his afternoons mentoring local teens about wool and weather. One evening, under the twinkle lights of the community pavilion, Emily addressed the village during the annual harvest dinner, now formally called the Quarter-4 Agricultural Yield Celebration and Stakeholder Appreciation Banquet. "I look around this room," she said, her voice carrying over the clatter of cutlery and laughter, "and I don't see job titles anymore. I see neighbors who've learned to value what each of us brings, whether it's a wheelbarrow or a spreadsheet." Cheers erupted, glasses raised high. Even skeptics from neighboring towns had taken notice. Some chuckled, some scoffed, but others began visiting more frequently, seeking advice, quietly jotting down how Greenfield does things. One such visitor, a government official from the Regional Development Board, showed up with a clipboard and a curious expression. "Tell me," he asked Mr. Grant as they walked past the newly painted tool shed labeled Resource Mobilization Unit, "what's your secret?" Mr. Grant didn't hesitate. People want to be seen. And once you see someone, really see what they do and why it matters, everything changes. The official scribbled furiously in his notebook. By the end of the year, Greenfield Township had been featured in 2 national articles, invited to a Rural Innovation Summit, and shortlisted for a Civic Engagement Award. But to the villagers, none of that really mattered. Spring arrived in Greenfield with the scent of fresh soil and the sound of boots on gravel paths. But unlike years past, the town felt different, not just revitalized, but deeply unified. The villagers had moved beyond the novelty of clever job titles. Now, they embraced the structure and language of their new system because it worked. The weekly strategic alignment meetings weren't just about crop rotations or supply inventory. They were where voices were heard. Even young Lucy, the junior poultry ecosystem coordinator, confidently presented her findings on henhouse efficiency, earning respectful nods from the senior members. As planting season kicked off, coordination was seamless. The Resource Allocation Committee ensured that every tool and every helping hand was where it needed to be. Volunteers worked fields not just their own, but also their neighbors. This was an obligation. It was ownership of the village's collective well-being. At the center of it all was Emily, whose whiteboard was now replaced by a large chalk mural in the town square. Every week, she updated it with drawings and timelines, equal parts art and action plan. Children gathered to watch. Elder villagers leaned on canes and nodded as they saw their wisdom chalked into strategy. Then came the Greenfield Exchange Forum, a weekend event that welcomed officials, educators, and curious leaders from other rural areas. Over local bread and stew, villagers explained how a few name changes sparked a cultural shift. A professor from the city stood in awe. "You mean to tell me a synergy officer is just Tom the beekeeper?" "Was," Emily corrected gently. "Now he's Tom the beekeeper and the head of our agricultural innovation cohort. And he finally believes he matters." The visitors took notes. Many stayed longer than expected. Some asked if they could volunteer for a week, just to learn. On the final night of the forum, under fairy lights strung from barn to barn, the villagers gathered once more. Music played, kids ran laughing through the fields, and elders shared stories by the fire. The sign that once read Greenfield Township now bore a new name, carefully carved in wood. Greenfield Cooperative Village, where every role is rooted in respect. Emily stood beside Mr. Grant, both of them quietly watching the scene unfold. "You ever think we'd come this far?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Not like this. I thought we'd get better. I didn't know we'd get whole." As the warm days of summer rolled in, the fields of Greenfield Cooperative Village blossomed, mirroring the energy and momentum within the community. The success of the Exchange Forum had drawn not only attention but action. Letters poured in from neighboring villages, asking for guidance, collaboration, and, in some cases, refuge. Greenfield welcomed them. A small delegation from the drought-stricken village of Hazelwood arrived, seeking advice on sustainable irrigation. Emily and Tom, alongside the newly formed hydrology and eco-resilience team, shared blueprints and walked them through Greenfield's water conservation strategies. The result was more than technical support. It was a bond between communities. Meanwhile, teenagers from neighboring towns began applying for internships in Greenfield. The village launched a seasonal apprenticeship program, offering training in permaculture, decentralized leadership, and even conflict resolution. What began as a joke about job titles now served as a pipeline of empowerment for youth across the region. But it wasn't always smooth. One evening, a heated debate broke out at a General Assembly meeting over whether to allow expansion into the nearby woodlands for additional farmland. Environmental stewards clashed with agricultural leads. The room buzzed with tension until young Lucy stood up, nervous but determined. "What if we didn't choose between growth and preservation?" she said. "What if we tried vertical farming on the South Ridge, where erosion is already a problem?" The room fell silent. Then heads began to nod. By autumn, Greenfield unveiled its first terraced microfarm, an idea sparked by a teenager and brought to life through collective effort. As harvest season approached, a quiet pride settled over the village. The Festival of Shared Hands was planned, not just to celebrate the harvest, but to honor each contribution, every idea, every labor, every soul that had built something bigger than themselves. On festival night, beneath lanterns swinging from old oaks, Emily took the stage. She looked out over the crowd, elders with children on their laps, newcomers and longtime residents, farmers and innovators, each with calloused hands and hopeful hearts. "This isn't the end of our story," she said. "It's proof that no village is too small to dream big, and no dream is too bold when we dream it together." As the crowd erupted in applause, a slow chant began, one that would carry through Greenfield's future for generations to come. "Together we grow. Together we rise." As winter approached, the atmosphere in Greenfield shifted from celebratory to introspective. The winds grew sharper, but the spirit of the people only burned brighter. Cold seasons were always a test of planning, of resilience, of heart. The community prepared with purpose. Food cellars were stocked with root vegetables, preserves, and grains from the recent harvest. Solar panels were cleaned and fortified. And thanks to Lucy's suggestion, the new terraced microfarm was insulated and retrofitted for cold weather crops. But it was the people, not the systems, who defined Greenfield's strength. One December evening, a terrible blizzard swept in. Power lines in nearby villages collapsed. Roads became impassable. Many were stranded, afraid, unprepared. Greenfield acted without hesitation. They initiated warmth rings, a mutual aid system where every home took in neighbors from less resilient towns. Schools became shelters. Communal kitchens served hot meals 24/7. A new team, the Snow Runners, braved the storm to deliver blankets and medicine on sleds and skis. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was. Supplies ran low. Tempers flared. A pipe burst in the main greenhouse. But each time they stumbled, they adapted. One night, a child from Hazelwood, wrapped in 3 scarves and curiosity, asked Emily, "Why do you help people who aren't from here?" Emily knelt beside her. "Because once, Greenfield was a village no one believed in. And someone helped us. Helping others, it's how we remember who we are." By the time the snow thawed, Greenfield wasn't just a village anymore. It had become a symbol of courage, of connection, of what was possible when people chose each other over fear and action over apathy. Spring returned, as it always does. But this time, it didn't just bring flowers. It brought new families, new partners, new ideas. As spring unfolded with its promise of renewal, Greenfield stood not only as a thriving village, but as a beacon of hope far beyond its borders. What had begun as a quiet community effort had grown into a movement, a living proof that trust, compassion, and shared purpose could weather any storm. Emily, standing beneath the blooming cherry tree at the center of town, watched children from all walks of life laugh and chase each other through the grass. Behind her, the elders exchanged stories with new residents. Builders, farmers, teachers, and artists, once strangers, now worked side by side. Greenfield wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was alive. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt certain the future wasn't something to fear. It was something they would shape, together. With hands calloused from work and hearts softened by love, they had done more than survive. They had built a home.